Good afternoon. Thank you for joining JCI Live Austin, Texas, USA. My name is Mauri Gandy. And I just wanted to open up with this song. When I heard it this week, I said, there's so much news going on, but we have to remember, being children of God, that God is still on the throne. So I'm going to open to Scripture today, and God just turned me to Ecclesiastes 2:12 through 16. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom, and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise man has eyes in his head, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I thought in my heart, the fate of the fool will overtake me always. What then do I gain by being wise? I said in my heart, this too is meaningless, for the wise man, like the fool, will not be long remembered. In days to come, both will be forgotten. Like the fool, the wise man too must die. So on to some local news here in Austin, Texas. Just yesterday, there was a huge rally and march that went downtown for the support Trump people. And there was a large crowd that went on. And then, last Tuesday, for the state news, the Texas Senate voted to approve the Convention of States that is given to us on Article 5 that was written by our founding fathers. Now what? The House needs to approve it, and we need 35 other states to approve it. Texas is leading the fight to stop the outrageous spending of our government. Go Texas. And also, last Tuesday, President Trump spoke to Congress, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen that. A lot of people who have even been keeping an eye on him, not sure how he's going to be as a president. So this was his best speech, and he did a great job. He sounded real presidential. And then immediately Wednesday, there were a lot of Democrat senators that caused hate and chaos on the Senate session, talking about Senator Jeff Sessions. And I read something just yesterday that I thought was really interesting. I'll just read the article here. Instead of moving back to where they're from, as past ex-presidents have done, or at least moving someplace else, as the Clintons did, Barack Obama decided to stay in Washington, D.C., relocating just a stone's throw from the Capitol. What he's doing is he's orchestrating a coup, I think they call it, a shadow government. And also he had his previous advisor, Valerie Jarrett, who is Iranian, moving in with him so that he could orchestrate his shadow government to remove President Trump. Now let's look at Attorney General Jeff Sessions. There's the Democrats in the Senate and the Congress are saying that he lied under oath. And it's been shown over and over that when he said that he had no conversations with the Russians on the 2016 election, that's the question they asked him, and now they're saying, well, you did have communication with the Russians. And so what they're showing now, the information that's coming to light here, is that In the last days at the White House, let's see, we'll just move over here to some more. It's established that there was nothing unusual about a sitting member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, which session was at the time, meeting with the foreign ambassador. Yet the Democrats are treating this particular meeting as if it were an act of high treason. We've now learned that the very meeting the Democrats are using as a basis for demanding Sessions' resignation was set up by the Obama administration in the first place. Details of Jeff Sessions' first meeting with the Russian ambassador in 2016 are beginning to surface. Turns out that Sessions spoke to the Russian ambassador on the invitation of the Obama administration itself. Talk about a setup. So you arrange a meeting, and the meeting happens, and then after the fact, you crucify the guy who attended the meeting for having an inappropriate meeting that you set up. Those final two words, set up, may be heading towards a new level of meaningless. As for anybody asking, how does a shadow government even work? Here's your answer. Well, I guess basically it's another article, but just like so much is going on right now, it's just amazing. I'm going to, let's go to this clip, Jonathan, on Mark Levin. That when Trump tweeted out, I think it was Saturday morning, that he realized what had happened, they found out that some of his administration had heard Mark Levin, who's a radio host, and he also had been part of the Reagan administration, and he really understands what's going on in the government. He's an attorney. So I'm going to play this 5-minute clip that explains what he had realized what had happened, and then the administration found out what was going on. So, John, would you show that clip?
Point. The incredible scandal here is the Obama administration was investigating top officials in the Trump campaign, maybe even Trump himself, during the course of the election. Listen to this from the Washington Post today. U.S. investigators have examined contacts Attorney General Jeff Sessions had with Russian officials during the time he was advising Trump's presidential campaign, according to people familiar with the matter. They were investigating a sitting United States senator who hadn't done anything. They're investigating a sitting attorney general who hasn't done anything. Based on what premise? The fact that he was advising Donald Trump? Is this not appalling and shocking to you? The focus of the U.S. counterintelligence investigation has been on communications between Trump campaign officials and Russia. The inquiry involving Mr. Sessions is examining his contacts while serving as Mr. Trump's foreign policy advisor in the spring and summer of 2016. One person familiar with the matter said, why? Why are they investigating Sessions? On what basis? On what basis whatsoever? He has no financial links to Russia. He holds no quarter or special brief for Russia. This is astounding to me. Absolutely. I am telling you as somebody who served under an attorney general, directly under an attorney general. I can't believe this. What we need to find out here, ladies and gentlemen, is what the Obama administration and the government agencies under the Obama administration was doing during the course of this election. That's what we need to find out. Listen to this story in the New York Times. Obama administration rushed to preserve intelligence of Russian election hacking. You see how coordinated it is? It's coming from the top. These damn fool Republicans in Congress, it is pathetic. They are sickening. In the Obama administration's last days, some White House officials, that is, Obama's underlings, scrambled to spread information about Russian efforts to undermine the presidential election and about possible contacts between the associates of President-elect Donald J. Trump and Russians across the government. So what information did Obama and his surrogates in the Oval Office, around the Oval Office, have about Donald Trump and his advisors and people on his staff that they were spreading around the government because they knew it would leak? They're the fingerprints. Now, the New York Times doesn't intend it to be so. There are the fingerprints, right there. Former American officials say they have two aims: to ensure that such meddling isn't duplicated in future American or European elections, and to leave a clear trail of intelligence for government investigators. No. Their goal. Let me tell you what's going on here. Here's the phrase. This is a silent coup. Silent, nonviolent coup. That's what's going on here. That is what's going on here. The Obama administration holdovers, the Obama administration lackeys outside of government, Schumer, Pelosi, all of them. This is exactly what's going on. And the rest of the New York Times piece is mostly propaganda. But right up front in the first paragraph, they give it away. So in other words, this information that was being collected, maybe by the NSA, the CIA, the DIA, the FBI, who knows? Maybe all of them, was obviously provided to the Oval Office. Because it says right here, in the Obama administration's last days, some White House officials scrambled to spread information about Russian efforts to undermine the presidential election across the government. So they gathered the information, and they were spreading it across the government for the purpose of having it leaked, a felony, to the media. Correct? How else do you read that? Well, there's no other way to read that. But they did more than that. They had to create the circumstances where they would get the information and be able to spread it to other departments and agencies before they leave office. Because the current policies in place didn't allow that. So you know what they did? We talked about this before, the great Michael Walsh piece in PJ Media. They gave, on the way out the door, the NSA broad new powers to share all kinds of intel information with all kinds of agencies and departments on the way out the door. I'll get to that in a minute. We'll be right back.
I was just going to read what's up and then my... Okay, so while Secretary of State Hillary Clinton personally signed off on a transaction that gave Russia a 20% stake in the entire U.S. stockpile of uranium. Shortly thereafter, Uranium One made $2 million in donations to the Clinton Foundation, and Bill Clinton made a Moscow speech for $500,000 cash payoff. But somehow it's Donald Trump who is kowtowing to the Russia government. And then there was also another Facebook I saw that the Russians and Ted Kennedy back then were in cahoots with the election of Ronald Reagan. So, I mean, it's just amazing to me what the Democrats are doing. I'm just really proud that I'm not calling myself a Democrat anymore. That was 28 years ago that I saw the light, that they were just absolutely corrupt. And I think a lot of politicians are corrupt, but this is just terrible. Also have some news on Ted Cruz. There's a video, not a video, it's a picture of Ted Cruz on a horse in Houston Parade yesterday. And then on Friday, March 2nd, Senator Ted Cruz talked about the Texas Independence Day at the Senate. And I have a video on that.
Independence Day. 181 years ago, 59 delegates met at Independence Hall in Washington on the Brazos to risk everything to make freedom a reality for generations of Texans to come. Today, I continue on a tradition started by the late Senator John Tower and carried on by members of the Texas delegation, and read the words of a 26-year-old Lieutenant Colonel, William Barrett Travis, who at the time was under sieges by the force of Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. On February 24th, 1836, Travis penned the immortal letter. To the people of Texas and all Americans in the world, fellow citizens and compatriots, I am besieged by 1,000 or more of the Mexicans under Santa Anna. I have sustained a continual bombardment and cannonade for 24 hours and have not lost a man. The enemy has demanded a surrender at discretion. Otherwise, the garrison are to be put to the sword if the fort is taken. I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat. Then I call on you in the name of liberty, of patriotism, and of everything dear to the American character, to come to our aid with all dispatch. The enemy is receiving reinforcements daily and will no doubt increase to 3,000 or 4,000 in 4 or 5 days. If this call is neglected, I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible and die like a soldier who never forgets what is due to his own honor and that of his country. Victory or death. Signed, William Barrett Travis. That same love of life, liberty, and property of the people that spurred the Texians at the Alamo and throughout the Revolution still lives in each Texan today. I think it is particularly appropriate that right now, this body will be confirming former Texas Governor Rick Perry to be the Secretary of Energy. That is fitting to the spirit of freedom and independence of Texans. Texans fought for it, they died for it, and we owe it to their sacrifice to carry the torch of freedom for future generations, and we will. To all Texans, happy Independence Day.
I'm so proud to have our Texas being represented by Senator Ted Cruz. Jonathan just came in here. I just made a terrible adjustment or introduction from going from a clip about what Hillary Clinton has done in the past, and then all of a sudden there's Ted Cruz. But then I looked at the scripture that God gave me, wisdom and folly. So definitely that folly and is completely opposite of wisdom that Ted Cruz has. Okay, so also I'm just going back on what happened last week. This was on March 2nd that Senator Cruz talked about the Texas Independence Day. And then on Thursday, we have a video that Senator Cruz was on MSNBC, Morning Joe, about the political theater of Jeff Sessions. So we're going to show that clip.
Member of the Judiciary and Armed Services Committees, Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. Senator, thank you for being on.
Senator, great to have you.
Good morning.
Great to have you here. You're an attorney and certainly can read testimony. I was saying this morning that the Leahy question and answer wasn't as troubling because, of course, it was about campaign. Are you concerned, though, about the Al Franken questioning and answering where Sessions seemed to volunteer that he'd never spoken with any Russian officials?
Joe, I'm not concerned about that. I think what we're seeing is a lot of political theater. Could Jeff have been more clear in what he said? Yes, I think that was unfortunate, but I think context matters a lot. Jeff was being asked about the Trump campaign communicating with the Russians. I think he understood that he was answering it in that capacity, and that is perfectly understandable. And the reason I say it's political theater is the underlying meeting. You know, this morning everyone's in high dudgeon about this meeting. The underlying meeting is a nothing burger. It's what senators do every day, meeting with foreign ambassadors. That's part of the job, and Jeff was a very hard-working senator. He'll be a very hard-working attorney general. And so I think everyone's getting all worked up because it's a chance to beat up the attorney general and beat up the president. But I think the underlying meeting is simply doing his job.
Senator Cruz, it's Willie Geist. It's good to see you. You also sit on the Armed Services Committee with Senator Sessions. Did you meet with the Russian ambassador last summer?
I didn't, but it's interesting. And when this story broke last night, I asked my team to just pull up the calendar for January and February of this year. And I met with 6 different ambassadors in the last 2 months. That's part of being a senator. And, a minute ago, Joe was asking, well, gosh, when Al Franken was questioning Jeff Sessions, and Jeff Sessions was saying that as the Trump campaign is a surrogate, he didn't meet with Russia. I'm willing to bet Al Franken has met with a great number of ambassadors. I'm also willing to bet that when Al Franken meets with foreign ambassadors, he didn't consider it the Hillary campaign meeting with them. Al Franken was supporting Hillary Clinton. He was a surrogate for Hillary Clinton. But when he's doing his job as a senator, he's not a representative of the campaign. I think the same was exactly true for Jeff Sessions when he was doing his job as a senator.
But, Senator, we are talking about the Russian ambassador in the middle of all these questions surrounding links between the Trump campaign and the government of Russia. Why specifically did you, and according to all the reporting, no other member of the Armed Services Committee, not seek a meeting with the Russian ambassador?
Well, listen, by and large, I haven't sought meetings with ambassadors. Typically, they call the office and want to talk with me. And, if the Russian ambassador had called and asked for a meeting, I imagine I probably would have taken the meeting. And that's part of the job. But I can't recall an instance where I've reached out to an ambassador and said, let's do a meeting. But different countries want to come by. They want to discuss different issues they're concerned about. That's part of doing your job. When you're on the Armed Services Committee, I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I served with Jeff. I'm on the Judiciary Committee. I served with Jeff. And, one of the things that's important, you see Democratic politicians this morning coming out and blasting Jeff and saying things like that this was misleading. Many of us have served with Jeff for years, sometimes decades in the Senate. Jeff Sessions is a man of integrity. He's a man of candor. I don't know any senator who served with Jeff Sessions, Democrat or Republican, who would say that Jeff has been anything less than totally honest. Now, they don't like that he's a conservative. The Democrats don't like Jeff as a conservative, but he is very open and honest about his views. And by the way, Jeff has been a serious critic of Russia. He's not been shy calling out Putin. So the notion that there was something somehow wrong with a senior senator on the Armed Services Committee meeting with a foreign ambassador, I think that's a nothing burger. And the testimony, Jeff should have been more clear. I think he said that he wished he was more clear, but at the end of the day, I don't think that there's any there.
So you've said repeatedly now that the meeting that Senator Sessions had with the Russian ambassador is a, quote, nothing burger. Do you have information, Senator, about what they talked about in that meeting? How do you know it's a nothing burger?
I know that meeting with a foreign ambassador is part of the routine responsibilities of serving in the Senate. I have no idea what was talked about in that meeting or any other meeting that, my understanding is Jeff met with 25 different ambassadors last year. And I don't know what was discussed in those meetings. I don't know what was discussed.
But not the Russian ambassador, right, Senator?
Well, among the 25 that Sessions met with last year was the Russian ambassador.
But you haven't met, nor have any of the other members of Armed Services with the Russian ambassador.
Well, my understanding of the Washington Post reporting is they asked, 6 didn't respond, so we don't know that none have. Of those that responded, they said they hadn't met last year. But, I was watching on another show, Mike Rogers, who was chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. He said, sure, he'd met with the Russian ambassador. If you're doing your job, you meet with ambassadors and foreign leaders, and that's part of the job.
Senator, it's been reported, I don't have it confirmed myself, that this meeting's being investigated by federal investigators. There's clearly now an appearance issue, even if, as you suggested, the thing's a nothing burger. Stipulating all you said about your former colleague, is it still possible that recusal is the right thing in your mind?
Well, I think earlier on the show, you played Jeff Sessions this morning saying that he would recuse himself where appropriate. I mean, obviously, if there were an investigation into himself, recusal would be appropriate. I don't have any indication that there would be an investigation because I don't think there's any credible allegation that Jeff did anything wrong in meeting with the Russian ambassador. He didn't speak as clearly as he should, although I will note Jeff had an all-day marathon hearing where he was getting hammered, and Jeff was answering as candidly, as directly as possible, and I think in context he was answering no. As part of the Trump campaign, he wasn't meeting with the Russians, and my understanding is he wasn't thinking about his role as a senator. But I don't see anything for there to be an investigation, but of course if there was into him directly, any official would recuse themselves from an investigation into their own conduct.
Senator Ted Cruz, thank you for your perspective this morning.
Thank you, Senator. 2 days.
Okay, the next clip is on Wednesday. Senator Cruz was on MSNBC again at the Morning Joe show on Trump's speech. So I'm just going back each day of last week.
Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. Very good to have you on the show. How are you?
Good morning, Mickey. Good to be with you.
Senator, you said that this president accomplished something last night that you did not think could be accomplished.
What was that?
He found a Lincoln quote that made you twitch. Protectionism. Yeah, I heard of protectionism, and Republicans all stood up, which shocked me, and Democrats all sat down.
Look, that was a curious moment. I think Democrats missed some opportunities last night. But I'll tell you, my assessment of the speech, I thought it was a very, very strong speech. I thought it was designed to be, and it was, in fact, a positive, unifying vision for the country.
Why do you think he did that? We're asking that question, why now? That sounded, you followed this so closely, and you have your whole life. That sounded like an inaugural address last night.
Maybe the one we never got.
The one we didn't get, yeah.
So what it was think? A very different speech from the inaugural, and some of it is 6 weeks into the job. The weight of the job, anyone, it is overwhelming.
Right. Absolutely.
There's a reason
Reagan,
why every president
Clinton,
goes gray in office. They age 20 years in 4 years. Yeah. And you don't meet with the family of a fallen Navy SEAL.
Right. Yeah.
And not have it impact you, and impact you differently when you're the commander-in-chief.
Mika, we noticed, it's interesting, we noticed when the first time he came back from Dover, there was a look on his face that in the 10 years we've known him, we've never seen that look on his face.
It does seem, though, that this presidency is on this sort of delay, and it's the speech that we wanted to see at the inauguration, Michael Steele. It happened last night, I guess, in some ways, and, it had rough edges, but you saw the fingerprints of Bannon being removed, but still a little bit there.
Well, they're playing a little catch-up, and I think they are figuring out how Washington reacts to them and responds, and how they respond to Washington. And I think it's going to be important to see how he responds, particularly with Republicans in the House and the Senate. I think you make the point, Joe, with that line from Lincoln, using Lincoln, the father of the party, to promote protectionism is an interesting position for the party to find itself. How do Republicans in the House and the Senate reconcile with this nationalist big government republicanism that is looking to spend close to $5 to $6 trillion short term, and given the folks who came into the Congress saying that's not our game plan?
I'm not sure that is where this administration is going. I do think what we saw last night, one of the most important jobs for the president, is to paint a vision of where the country can go, and so people at home can see this is what we can do. And that, I think he did a fabulous job of. He did a fabulous job focusing on jobs and working men and women. This president was elected by the Reagan Democrats, by working class voters, by truck drivers and mechanics and men and women with calluses on their hand, and he spoke to them last night.
And you were elected, following upon Michael Steele's point, you were elected, and a lot of us were very concerned about big government republicanism. When Republicans controlled this town from 2001 to 2009, we did a miserable job on spending. How do you stop that train. When you're talking about
especially with all the
tax cuts, I love tax cuts. I love tax cuts. Defense spending, I love defense spending. You love defense spending.
Infrastructure.
But then infrastructure, I love you. We love all of these things. But I wrote a book, not to talk about my book, but I wrote a book in 2004.
But Joe's saying buy his book.
No, I'm not going to say the name. But this is it's a warning that in 2004 I was condemning my party for not making tough choices. Can you guarantee the small government wing of our party that mistake's not going to be repeated again?
I guarantee that it still matters. We'll see. The details matter. On infrastructure, listen, infrastructure is a perfectly legitimate role for the federal government. It's important. Do we need roads? Do we need bridges? Yes.
Right.
It matters a lot how it's paid for. It matters how it's structured. There are infrastructure programs I could enthusiastically support.
Right.
If it's a $1 trillion boondoggle, if it's an Obama-type stimulus,
right.
I think a lot of Republicans would not be able to support that.
We pay as we go. Can you do that?
Let's wait till the details come out. I think they're working on that. But, the biggest question, how do you address, you were asking about the deficit and the debt. The best way, the only way really to address the debt is economic growth. If you're a numbers person, a lot of people at this table are numbers people. You look at the federal budget. Economic growth has a greater impact on the budget than anything else. Since World War II, our economy's grown on average 3.3%.
Right.
For 8 years, we've been mired at 1% and 2% under Obama. I told President Trump last week, repealing Obamacare, reg reform, tax reform, if we get these done, if the economy's growing at 5%, I said, Mr. President, you'll be reelected in a landslide. That is the whole battle to get to 5% GDP growth, and we can do it with tax reform, reg reform, and repealing Obamacare.
May I ask you about the Affordable Care Act? Your colleague, Senator Cotton, from a neighboring state, said there have been Arkansans hurt by the Affordable Care Act, but he said there have been Arkansans who've been helped by it. Is that true of Texans, too? And if so, what do you say to people in Texas who have come to be reliant on the existing law?
The vast majority of people in this country have been hurt by Obamacare. And one of the things that I try to do a lot of is roundtables. I was just last week, I was in South Dallas, which is a relatively low-income part of the city, and was at Dallas Baptist University doing a roundtable to small businesses, included a number of minority small businesses. And they discussed that it's the biggest job killer in the country. Over and over again, they talked about not being able to hire people, laying people off, forcing employers into part-time work, that it was bankrupting.
You said vast majority hurt, and I understand your litany there. Are there Texans who've been helped by it? And what do you say to them as they're worried about your colleagues and you trying to change the law?
Listen, Obamacare was designed to have winners and losers. So can you find a specific instance of a person who was benefited by it? Yes. But if you look at it, there are about 20 million people who have some form of coverage that can be credited to Obamacare. More than half of that is under Medicaid. They were jammed into expanded Medicaid. Now, if you look at this, those are largely childless, healthy adults put into the Medicaid population. Medicaid was designed for the very vulnerable, for the disabled, for single moms. Now, when they expanded Medicaid, they didn't increase the number of doctors who take Medicaid. They didn't increase the service that is available. So what people in Medicaid are saying, their waiting lists have gotten longer. They're getting less services. And in order to try to benefit those 20 million people, what Obamacare did was messed up the health insurance for 200 million, for the remaining people.
So even people who benefited and feel like they benefit, you're saying under the Republican plan, they'll be better off.
I think let's take the Medicaid population. Medicaid produces terrible outcomes, produces much worse health outcomes than having private insurance. I want to see an outcome where a lot fewer people are on Medicaid and more people are able to afford private health insurance. I think that's better for people. And this is all about, one of the things I really liked that President Trump said last night is he focused on Obamacare. We've got to drive down the cost of premiums. Families can't afford health care. That's a message that resonates, and it resonates in the heartland.
All right, Senator Ted Cruz.
Thank you, Senator.
Really appreciate you being on the show. You're a good sport.
It is always fun. I'll note the last time I was on, I was with Lindsey Graham, and,
yes.
and you guys extracted an apology from Lindsey for a death threat. So I appreciate it.
I always try and help you out because sometimes I've been a little tough on you. We're not enemies, though.
No,
absolutely not.
And how kind of Lindsey to
sorry about that Murdy thing. That's what he said.
Poisoning to not seem like agents for North
Ted
Korea.
Cruz.
That was very, very kind. Very kind of you.
Yesterday on Morning Joe, we spoke with the new chairman of the DNC.
the last clip that Senator Cruz talked with Fox News after Tuesday's night President Trump's speech on the Congress.
Him throughout the entire process, at least in proximity on the stage as he went through the campaign, and you've had your own sort of ups and downs with this president. What did you think about tonight?
I thought tonight was a bold, positive speech. It laid out a vision for America that I think millions of Americans have been hungry for. It is a vision that focuses first and foremost on bringing back jobs and economic growth. And that's what I hear from Texans all across our great state. It's what I hear all across the country, is that after 8 years of stagnation, of jobs fleeing the country, of wages stuck in the mud, we're ready to see booming economic growth again. And the keys to growth are repealing Obamacare, our regulatory reform, and tax reform. And we heard a great deal tonight about repealing Obamacare, regulatory reform, and tax reform. It was a very encouraging night.
Well, Senator, we apologize for the motorcades that are going by behind us. We're not under arrest or anything like that. We want to continue this interview.
Senator, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you.
Thank you very much.
Senator, what about the call for immigration reform? I mean, having been on the debate stage with then candidate Donald Trump and having been on the back end of some pretty aggressive questioning about immigration and the issue of immigration, where do you think that stands?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the most poignant moments of the entire speech was when the president recognized the families of those who have been murdered by criminal illegal aliens. And I've had the opportunity to visit with family members in exactly that circumstance. And it was powerful. It was real. Those are voices that much of the media doesn't allow to be heard. And it was really important for the president to highlight that. You know, just last week I was down in McAllen on the Texas border in the Rio Grande Valley, and I went to the muster of the midnight shift of the Border Patrol, and the relief among the Border Patrol at finally having a president and an administration that will enforce the law was palpable. These are men and women that risk their lives to keep our country safe, and they've been so frustrated by 8 years of an Obama administration that would release violent, criminal illegal aliens. They're really grateful now to have an administration that's willing to enforce the law.
Senator Cruz, what do you think about the fact that you're not hearing a lot of fiscal conservatism from President Trump at this point? He's not talking about reform with regard to Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid, and yet he's talking about spending quite a bit of money on things like infrastructure.
Well, look, we will certainly look at the details of the budget, and there is no doubt that we've got to be serious about the national debt and the deficit every year. But the most potent tool for dealing with the national debt and the deficit is not cost-cutting, it's economic growth. Economic growth is the only first-order variable. It's why my number one priority in the Senate is and always has been jobs and economic growth. You know, if you look historically since World War II, we've averaged about 3.3% growth a year. Under Obama, we saw growth year after year of just 1% and 2%. That anemic growth, we can't fix these problems. And it's why I was so encouraged by President Trump's speech tonight. He focused very hard on regulatory reform, on building the Keystone Pipeline, on lifting job-crushing regulations, on lifting the crushing regulations of the FDA, allowing innovation in pharmaceuticals, on tax reform, Obamacare repeal, and reg reform. That will produce enormous economic growth, millions of new jobs. That's how we pay down our debt, and that's how we solve our fiscal crisis.
Senator, quickly, if you could, can Republicans sing from the same sheet of music when it comes to Obamacare repeal and replace?
I believe we can, and I believe we must. I think we have to honor our commitment. We've campaigned for 6 years promising to repeal Obamacare. And I think what we need to do is start with the 2015 legislation. In 2015, virtually every Republican voted to repeal Obamacare. We need to start with that legislation. On top of that, we need to repeal the insurance mandates that are driving up premiums, that are making health care unaffordable. And then we should focus on areas of consensus, areas that bring Republicans together, like allowing purchase of insurance across state lines, like expanding health savings accounts and making health insurance portable. If we focus on areas of consensus, that's how we get it done, and I believe we are going to get it done. I'm working very, very hard to try to bring my colleagues together in both the Senate and the House with the administration to fulfill the promise we made to the American people.
Senator Cruz, we appreciate your time joining us from Statuary Hall tonight. Thank you.
Yes, our Senator Ted Cruz is working very, very hard for the people, especially our Texans. I just showed you 23 minutes of videos he did just this week since Tuesday. So just amazing what's going on. And the last thing he was talking about was repealing or redoing Obamacare. And I have a picture that went on with Nancy Pelosi. If Jonathan can find that. He said, give me a few minutes. There it is. Nancy Pelosi asked Ted Cruz why he wants to defund Obamacare. And he replied, unlike you, I actually read it. I just love that quote. Also, Ann Coulter, you may know her. She's written books and a newscaster. She said, it's a good day to remind everyone that Attorney General Eric Holder ran guns to Mexico, lied to Congress about it, was found in contempt, and he was never prosecuted. So it's like we have a different set of rules on what the Democrats can do and what the Republicans can do. So now I'm going to do a quick book review on The American Miracle that I'm reading. It's just an awesome book. And I found this clip at 700 Club where they actually talked to the author, Michael Medved. And I'll show that.
Since the planting of the cross at Cape Henry in 1607, when English settlers dedicated this new world to God and the gospel, American history has recorded an uncanny pattern. At moments of crisis, when it seems disaster is imminent, something else happens time and time again, deliverance from crisis and progress toward a better future. Author Michael Medved says America's blessings are not due to random chance, but a reflection of God's guidance and intervention. In his new book, The American Miracle, Divine Providence in the Rise of the Republic, the best-selling author and radio host tells about some of the most significant events in America's rise to prosperity and power. And he reveals that what's at the heart of it all is what the founders always believed, that events of our nation's history unfolded not by accident, but according to a providential master plan.
Well, the book is called The American Miracle, Divine Providence in the Rise of the Republic. And Michael, you're with us to talk more about this. I've read a lot of George Washington, and the number of times he refers to providence is amazing. I think most Americans don't realize that. But what was it about him that caused that? He seemed to be a miracle man.
He was. My chapter about Washington in the book is called Indispensable, Indestructible. And people around him came to believe that he was indestructible. I mean, I tell the story of when he was first a 23-year-old colonel, lieutenant colonel in the Virginia militia. And he was part of the officer corps that rode out into the Battle of Monongahela in 1755. And again, 23 years old, there were 70 British officers on horseback. 69 of them were either killed or wounded. Wow. Washington was not. And he had 2 mounts shot out from under him. He had a bullet knock his hat off his head. He had bullet holes in his clothes. And it was so remarkable that 23-year-old guy, Samuel Davies, who later became president of Princeton, he was one of the most important preachers of the time, Presbyterian. Mm-hmm. He actually delivered a sermon and said, I cannot but hope that Providence has preserved this heroic youth, Colonel Washington, for some signal purpose to his country. Yeah. Pretty good. Again,
pretty good endorsement.
21 years before 1776. I've heard that the Indians actually claimed that they wanted to meet him because they
had targeted him because he was on a horseback.
This
is that apocryphal?
It is not apocryphal. I spent a great deal of time on that in the book because this is the story of what's called the Indian prophecy. And Washington's almost descendant, his step-grandson, had spoken to Dr. Craik, who had accompanied Washington on a well-documented expedition to the wilderness. And on that expedition, and there are a bunch of people around the campfire, and this was verified by at least two of them, there was an elderly Indian who came forward, and this was years after that Battle of Monongahela, and they said, Washington is going to become a great chief. He wasn't yet, it was before the Revolution. Mm-hmm. And they said, on the battle, our bullets couldn't miss. We killed all the British. This was a disaster for the British Army. He said, but bullets were powerless against this young man, and we were certain that the Great Spirit protected him. Now, this was written about and became very popular after Washington's death, which is, again, one of these strange coincidences. He died on December 14th, 1799, just weeks before the end of a whole century that he had dominated with his personality. And again, cheating death again and again. There's another story before the Battle of Brandywine. The most famous marksman in the history of the British Army was Major Patrick Ferguson. And right before the battle, he's with a nest of snipers, and Washington rides into sight. And he's wearing a large cocked hat and a cloak. And he said after the battle, Ferguson, he said, I could have put 6 musket balls into him without question, but it wasn't pleasant to me to harm someone who is so coolly attending to his duty. It's just remarkable. Something, in other words, came over him. And there's stories and stories and stories like this. Andrew Jackson, who is a dominant figure in our early history, in 1835, he goes to the Capitol building. It's his second term as president. He's an old man. He's at the end of his second term. He goes for a funeral of an ally of his who's a congressman from South Carolina. He's walking out of the funeral. He's under the rotunda. And all of a sudden, the crowd hears a gunshot. An unemployed house painter, British national, had come up to Jackson and fired at him with a musket from 6 feet away. You can't miss from 6 feet away. It misfired. And then Jackson starts beating him with his cane. The guy takes out a second gun. Fires again. It misfires. They later tested these muskets. There was nothing wrong with them. They just had misfired. And again, at the time, they rated the chances of that happening as 1 in 250,000. It's probably mathematically worse than that.
All right, well, let's talk about the election of Abraham Lincoln, because I think without him in the presidency, the nation would have divided.
No, there's no question about it. I cite in the book some of the conclusive historical determinations that Lincoln was the crucial element in Northern victory. And the fact that he became president is preposterous. People think that our current president-elect is an unlikely president. Mm-hmm. He's a billionaire and a famous man. Lincoln was a prairie lawyer. He had served 1 term in the House of Representatives. When, right before the convention, the Republican convention convened in 1860, his hometown paper, the Chicago Tribune, ranked the possible Republicans in the order of likelihood. Lincoln ranked 14th, and they thought he was all wrong. And yet he wins the nomination on the 3rd ballot, partially because Judge Davis helps to give out maybe counterfeit tickets to stock the galleries with Lincoln supporters. And then again, he becomes this American miracle, because Lincoln had a total of 6 months that he had spent in any school of any form. And he is one of the great prose writers and one of the great theological thinkers of all of history.
Have we gotten away from the concept that providence is guiding America? That we are a city on the hill?
We have, and the consequences have been dire. Because look, America's emergence as the dominant power in the world, militarily, culturally, economically, is totally unlikely. So people basically come to one of 2 ways to explain it. Either you explain it based upon America got to be so powerful because we're bad, because we enslaved people, because we destroyed Native Americans. By the way, you can argue against that argument because other countries that did it even worse than we did never gained the kind of success America did. We gained that success in spite of our sometimes cruel behavior, not because of it. So then you're left with the question, how do you explain America? And ultimately, it can't be just random accidents. It's not random evolution, it's intelligent design. So who's the designer? There are a lot of people who will say, okay, America had very good design, but it's these smart founders. It's Franklin and Adams and Washington and Hamilton and Madison. Okay, except they all saw themselves as the instruments of design, not its authors. Right. They all did, including the ones who
credited Providence with the ideas that they came up with.
No, entirely, and with all of these coincidences that kept helping them. For instance, the amazing story of the Battle of Brooklyn. And this is one of these stories when I was writing about it, it makes the hairs on your forearm sort of stand up because, wow. George Washington loses the biggest battle of the Revolutionary War in terms of the number of men involved. There's a British army of 30,000, crushes the Americans, and then surrounds them and traps them. They're trapped in Brooklyn Heights after losing the battle. British army surrounding them. On the East River, British men of war and the British Navy. How do they get out? They're talking about surrender or maybe fighting to the death against overwhelming odds. It's August of 1776. August in New York. August in New York is pretty sticky. Yeah. All of a sudden, the fog comes up out of nowhere. And everyone, again, at the time, saw this as a miracle, as an act of God.
It was.
It clearly was. Because they all said so. Because
Yeah.
it comes up out of nowhere, covers the river, they row across in silence and success, don't lose a single boat. And Washington is on the last boat, and the moment that he sets foot safely on Manhattan Island to resume command of his troops, the fog miraculously clears. And the British talked about this. They saw what happened to the Americans. They saw it as a wonder, as if this was, they referred to it as if Aladdin's magical lamp had somehow made the Americans disappear. Well, it was a bigger magic and bigger power than Aladdin.
All right. Well, the book is called The American Miracle, Divine Providence and the Rise of the Republic. You can find it wherever books are sold. And I encourage you to get in touch with our history, particularly these miraculous moments where God intervened. And we just have to wonder today, what great plan does God have for America today? And can we dream again that Providence is driving us, designing us, compelling us to do His will in the world today?
The American Miracle by Michael Medved. It's an awesome book, and I have started to read it. I haven't finished reading it, but I will be sharing this book for a while. There's a lot of videos that Michael Medved has on YouTube, and I can show some of those clips. But just some of the stories are so wonderful. The providence that has gone on about our country is just wonderful. So this week, right after our show, I have at 2 o'clock, I have a clip from Mark Crutcher on pro-life, what's going on with pro-life now. And it's a recent clip. And then at 2:30, the Trailer Park Show will be airing from last Monday on the Remembrance Project. They were on his show last week. And then tomorrow at 6 o'clock, last week, JCI show will be airing on Channel 11 at 6 o'clock. And then at 7 on Channel 10, switch over to Trailer Park Show. And then Right Talk with Mike Lee will be on. And then this coming Saturday at 9 a.m., Prophecies of Hope will have their lesson 18 from the convention I went to back last fall 2016, about the mark of the beast. And I'm going to go out with just this clip that I'm just going to talk about what was on this video that's going to be on Saturday. He said there are two classes of people, two groups, those that love God and those that do not. All a matter of a choice. Either we do the right thing because God is motivating us, or we don't. That's the beauty of God's love. It inspires free will. It inspires choice. It inspires what we have been given by the love of God, with Jesus Christ as the center. It is God's desire that the whole world repent. And repent means recognizing God's truth in His Word. Love God for the truth and get out of it now by power of God. When people choose over right over wrong, there is a righteous God.